Hi there, thanks for listening to this talk, which is all about social anxiety. I'm Sophie and I'm one of the wellbeing practitioners here at Centre 33. So to give you a bit of an overview about what we'll be covering in this topic, we're going to start by thinking about what is anxiety and also what do we mean by social anxiety. We're then going to talk through some quite common ways that social anxiety can present, so common types of anxious thoughts, of anxious feelings and behaviours. Then we're going to think a bit about what can keep social anxiety going. And then we're going to share some strategies, so around how to manage the anxious thoughts or worries, a strategy for overcoming anxiety. And we'll also share with you a bit about how to create some helpful goals. Then we're going to share some kind of in-the-moment relaxation exercises that can be really helpful. And then we're going to finish off today by letting you know about other places that you can go to find more information and support. So we're going to start by looking at a short video all about social anxiety. So if you bear with me, hopefully we can get this working.
You can start communicating with. Here we go, and meet the neighbors outside. Everyone thinks I'm weird because I never speak. I hope I don't have to order at a restaurant later. Why is everyone staring at me? They can probably tell I'm acting strange. It's so hot in here. How the hell am I supposed to enter the room if everyone is already there? Why can I never think of anything interesting to say? I'm going to make a fool out of myself as usual. Stop acting weird. Can they see me blushing? Wow, I'm glad I'm wearing a mask. He's only asking me out because he feels sorry for me. Small conversations and I can't say anything. What if I speak trip in front of everyone? Was my voice shaking? I can't eat this in front of people. It'd be boring. What if I say something stupid? He's going to laugh at me in this phone call. Can they see I'm sweating?
So as you probably worked out, that video was showing some quite common kind of scenarios that might cause somebody with social anxiety to worry. And I wonder what struck you from the video and whether any of those worries maybe felt quite familiar to you. What I noticed is that while the thoughts spoken seemed strong for those people, what I didn't see was people who were noticeably very anxious. And I suppose what I take from that is that social anxiety isn't always obvious to others or as obvious as we feel it might be. And I wonder if perhaps some of you listening in feel like it's actually incredibly noticeable when you're feeling anxious. Like everyone can see it and are really aware of the fact that you're feeling anxious. And that's one of the ideas we're going to talk about a little bit more later today. So the thoughts we have about ourselves, and particularly the thoughts we have about our anxiety, and how they can help to keep anxiety going. But also what I also noticed from that video is just the wide range of different types of people that are experiencing this social anxiety and having these worries. So in this talk today, we're looking at what social anxiety is and how it's made up of different types of thoughts, feelings and behaviours that can form a bit of a cycle sometimes for people that can keep anxiety going. We're going to be talking about some changes that can be made in these areas to help you to hopefully reduce your experience of feeling anxious. So firstly, what is anxiety? So anxiety is a really natural human emotion and an evolutionary safety response that's designed to protect us from threats or dangers. So if you imagine kind of way back that you were a cave person and you came face to face with a saber-toothed tiger, what happened in that moment is your brain would identify that tiger as a threat, and that would then activate a response in your body that caused you to either fight, to flight or run away, or freeze, so maybe to hide or to play dead, in order to keep yourself safe and away from that tiger. And it's this threat detection and threat response system that all humans still have and we all still use today. So another way of referring to this anxiety response is the fight, flight, freeze response, which some of you may have heard of. And it's called that because it prompts us to respond in one of those three ways. Because anxiety is designed to help keep us safe, it isn't always bad, and we do actually still need this FFF response and a certain level of anxiety in order to protect us from real life dangers. For example, if we were in the middle of crossing the road and a car suddenly swerved around the corner, it would be this anxiety or FFF response that caused us to most likely jump backwards onto the pavement to stay safe and out of the car's way. However, for some people, this FFF response can become activated at times when there isn't a genuine threat or danger, or when the danger isn't maybe as bad as our minds think it is. And this is when anxiety goes from being more of a helpful safety response to more unhelpful and a bit more problematic. One way of thinking about the difference between kind of helpful versus unhelpful anxiety is to liken anxiety to a smoke alarm. So helpful anxiety is if the smoke alarm goes off if there's a fire. But for some people, their smoke alarm may be a bit more reactive and might go off on other occasions, like if the toaster's burnt or if there's somebody smoking outside the window nearby. In those cases, there isn't necessarily a genuine threat, but the FFF or anxiety response has been activated anyway. So what it can help to do is to remind yourself that just because you're feeling anxious, that doesn't necessarily mean that there is something dangerous or scary happening. That can sometimes be really helpful in the moment. Some people's smoke alarms might be more reactive for lots of different reasons. Factors such as someone's genes, the people around them, their life experiences and their personal history. Different things like this can all affect how reactive somebody's smoke alarm is learnt to be. So if your anxiety FFF response or your smoke alarm is going off like this, more on the unhelpful side, if you've been feeling this way for a really long time, if the anxiety feels really intense or is really affecting your ability to do things, and that's when it's important to speak to somebody about how you're feeling to get some support with that. But hopefully in this talk today, we're going to begin to introduce some strategies and ideas that you can try to hopefully make a start in changing this cycle. So one way of thinking about the unhelpful or problematic anxiety is the fraction on the screen here. So anxiety can be thought of in terms of our perception of threat, so that's how scary something is. And an anxious person often has a heightened sense of threat, so a heightened sense of something, a situation is going to be scary. And they also have a decreased sense of being able to cope in these situations. So what we want to do when we're helping somebody to manage and reduce their anxiety is to reduce their perception of threat, so that's how scary they think something's going to be, and increase their confidence in how able they feel they are to cope in that situation. And we do this by looking at thoughts, feelings, and behaviours around the thing that makes you anxious. So what is social anxiety? Social anxiety is as it sounds, so anxiety that's brought on in social interactions. That could be through talking to other people, or through being around strangers or people that you feel less comfortable with, maybe being asked to answer questions, or needing to put your hand up in class, or being in busy spaces. Some common worries for people who experience this are that everyone is watching you and judging you, maybe worries that other people think you're stupid, or that you're going to do something which is embarrassing in front of other people. Because of the nature of social anxiety, not very many people talk about experiencing it, but I think actually that it's probably far more common than you might realise. And so there may well be people you know, maybe friends or peers or family members, who also experience social anxiety. So on the screen here, we have some thoughts that are quite common, commonly associated with social anxiety. So it could be the worry, what if I'm boring? What if I say something that's embarrassing? What if I stutter or my voice squeaks? What if they laugh at me? What if the teacher asks me a question? What if I blush? And as you can see, lots of other types of worry. And we're going to come on to talk about how having these thoughts can impact on how we feel and therefore how we want or feel able to behave in situations. So perhaps have a bit of a think about what your anxious thoughts are. Maybe you can relate to some of the ones on the screen, or maybe they've prompted you to think about other worries that you have. Anxiety can also affect the way that we feel. So some emotions commonly associated with anxiety include feeling worried, feeling nervous, maybe feeling panicky or scared or stressed. But social anxiety can also bring about other emotions, such as feeling sad or hopeless, maybe feeling inferior or lonely or jealous or ashamed. So again, have a think about how anxiety makes you feel. One of the first steps to managing anxiety is recognizing how and when we experience it. For some people, the thoughts might be the most noticeable part. For others, it might be the emotions, like the ones on screen here. And for other people, it might be more the physical symptoms or the behaviours, which we're going to come on to. Also here, just wanted to mention that often people who feel anxious might also experience other things, such as low mood, particularly due to some of the feelings mentioned above, so maybe around feeling lonely or feeling sad. And that one of the ways we support people with low mood is to support them to kind of connect more with other people. But of course, this can be really difficult if we're also experiencing social anxiety. Anxiety can also bring about or be tied up with feelings of anger. For example, you may be feeling really angry if you feel forced to do something social or forced to go to school or anything else that's causing you great anxiety. Or you might be feeling angry if you feel threatened. So anger is actually linked to the fight part of that FFF response. If this is your experience, hopefully by reducing the social anxiety, you will then notice a knock-on benefit to reducing any feelings of anger or low mood. But we do also have separate talks on those two topics available on our YouTube channel if that was something that you wanted to explore in more detail. So what are some common physical feelings or physical symptoms of anxiety? So anxiety often brings about physical changes in our bodies because what happens is when that FFF response is activated, hormones are then released by our brains into our body that causes changes in different parts of our body. And the reason it does this is to make sure that our bodies are in the best possible state to keep us safe. For example, it might cause physical feelings such as shortness of breath or heart racing or tightening of muscles as our bodies prepare for us to be able to run away from a danger. With social anxiety, some people have a hyper-awareness of how others may notice these physical changes, such as blood rushing to our face, or us sweating and worrying that people might see us sweating or blushing. And by worrying about that, that in turn can actually increase our anxiety and increase that anxious FFF response. So it's worth holding the thought or the positive affirmation that these physical symptoms are really likely to be more noticeable or matter more to the person that they're happening to, rather than to other people around them who might be observing them. Perhaps think about the last time that you saw someone else blush or stutter and what you thought of them. The chances are you may have had a thought such as, oh, I'm glad that's not me. But then possibly you moved on and didn't think about it again, or you may have felt very empathetic towards that person. And they're probably most other people's responses towards you if you're feeling anxious. But these are often the thoughts we have to ourselves. So one strategy, if you're really struggling with worrying about other people noticing any physical tells of anxiety, is to develop a kind affirmation to yourself, such as, this is more noticeable to me than to anyone else. Lastly, anxiety can affect how we behave. Two of the most common ways in which anxiety can affect behaviour is by causing people to need to escape or to avoid situations or places that make them feel anxious. Social anxiety can also cause people to develop certain coping mechanisms, such as only doing things at quiet times of the day, perhaps over-rehearsing things, crossing the street to keep away from people, maybe avoiding eye contact or actually avoiding people completely, such as not speaking in class or not going to social occasions like parties. Anxiety can also affect people's daily routines, such as causing people to feel more or less hungry than usual. And often it's feeling less hungry because the FFF response naturally makes our digestive system slow down, which can cause those feelings of butterflies or nausea. It can also affect routines by causing people to sleep more or less than usual. It may be sleeping more because anxiety can be a really tiring thing to experience, but it could also cause people to sleep less if they're kept awake with worries at night. So it's useful to think about what your anxious behaviours are or how social anxiety may be impacting on the things that you do. Usually people will manage anxiety by avoiding the thing that is making them anxious. And as we're going to come on to, while that often makes a lot of sense in the moment, that can be something which helps to keep anxiety going in the longer run. So again, have a bit of a think about what your anxious behaviours might be. So why can avoidance be unhelpful in the longer term? Well, firstly, to think about the short term. In the short term, it can feel like a helpful strategy because if we don't go into situations that bring on anxiety, that activate that FFF response, or we get out of those situations quickly, then that FFF response is unlikely to be activated, meaning that we don't experience those uncomfortable, unpleasant, horrible, anxious feelings. However, avoidance can keep anxiety going in the longer term because by not doing something, we never get the chance to change that anxiety equation that we talked about earlier. So our brains are going to continue to think of those situations as scary, so that perception of threat is unlikely to go down. And we also are likely to continue to think that we aren't able to cope in those situations, so our confidence is unlikely to increase. Often our fear of situations is driven by what we think will happen and not by what actually happens. And it's only through experience that we are able to find out what actually does happen in those situations. And hopefully we learn things that help to challenge our worries. So by trying a situation, we may learn that something is not as bad as we predicted. So maybe our worry doesn't come true at all. Or if the situation isn't great, then we might learn actually that we can cope with it better than we thought we could. And that's why research has found that repeated exposure to something that we fear can help to reduce our anxiety about it. But it's really important that we do this in a gradual and a manageable way. We are absolutely not suggesting that you jump straight into those scary situations, but rather find a way and come up with a plan to gradually ease yourself in so that your brains can get used to them and can learn from them. Research also suggests that our peak anxiety levels naturally begin to fall after about 20 minutes. So you will naturally experience that things may not be as anxiety provoking as you first thought. And then the next time you're in that situation, you may feel a little less anxious about it, and your anxiety should hopefully come down a little bit quicker until it's much less noticeable. And that's really the theory that this graph on the left-hand side of the slide is representing. So if we think about the first time we go into an anxiety-provoking situation, our anxiety is likely to shoot up quite high and to take quite a while to reduce down again. But the second, third, fourth, fifth times we go into those situations, our anxiety may still be activated, so it might go up, but not quite as high as the time before, and it should also come down quicker than the time before as well. So perhaps you've experienced this yourselves in some situations. So for example, after the COVID lockdowns, it may have been really hard for someone to think about buying something in a shop say Subway or Starbucks. But now after going there a few times, it maybe feels a bit more alright, and it feels like your anxiety about it has reduced a little, or may even have gone away completely. So what this slide shows is how the thoughts, the feelings and the behaviours that we've talked about can impact on one another and can develop into perhaps some unhelpful cycles of social anxiety. So we're going to use an example of someone called Marion, who is going to check out a college open day where there is a workshop and they're going to meet new people. So before the open day, thoughts go through Marion's head about the event. So Marion's worrying, I'm rubbish at making good first impressions, no one's going to like me, I'm going to be alone and miserable. These thoughts then really understandably lead to Marion feeling nervous about going and feeling unhappy and maybe feeling jittery or shaky and sick. The thoughts they have about the event is that it's a threat, and so that's why the body then triggers that FFF response, bringing about these physical and emotional feelings. Say Marion is able to go to the event, they feel able to cope with their anxiety about being there by not making eye contact with other people and avoiding conversations. So these two behaviours that Marion does when they're there are what we might call coping strategies or safety behaviours. And these are the sort of behaviours that can keep anxiety going in the longer term, while they're what Marion needs to do to help them feel able to attend the event and feel able to cope with the anxiety. In the longer term, it might contribute to keeping the anxiety going, because Marion might think that they can only cope as long as they don't make eye contact and as long as they don't have a conversation with anybody. So to help Marion reduce their anxiety about going to new events, Marion needs to realise and to learn that they can make eye contact and they can have a conversation with somebody and that they are able to cope in that situation. So maybe have a think about your kind of coping strategies or safety behaviours around social events. They might include things like always feeling you need to rehearse what to say before speaking to somebody, maybe always sitting in the same seat in the front or the back of the class, maybe always wearing sunglasses to avoid making eye contact with other people. So we can see how thoughts can impact on feelings and can impact on what we do in situations. And so by making changes in these areas, we can then affect the other areas and hopefully change that cycle. So if Marion was able to change their initial thoughts about the event from I'm rubbish at making good first impressions to lots of people will be new there and they might also find it a difficult or awkward situation. There are particular thinking styles, which we call negative automatic thoughts, or NATs for short, that can be associated with increased anxiety and social anxiety. And one thing that you can begin to do is notice when you're having these types of thoughts about yourself or the situation and try to reframe them. And that's something we're going to come on to talk about next. So if Marion's able to change the way that they think about this situation, they might still feel a little bit anxious, but hopefully less nervous, less unhappy, less jittery and sick. And there might also be room there for feeling a bit curious about the event and maybe even a bit excited about the prospect of going to this open day. And then if Marion's thinking about it in a bit more of a balanced way and is feeling a little bit less anxious, maybe a bit more confident, Marion might feel able to try asking a question at the college. And through doing that, Marion might feel really proud of themselves that they were able to do that despite feeling a bit anxious. And that hopefully will help to shift that pattern and that cycle. And then if Marion has other events coming up, they may think about them in a slightly different way and feel a little bit less anxious. So, negative automatic thoughts. There are lots of different types of negative automatic thoughts. And what we're going to do is talk through some that are particularly relevant to social anxiety. So there's one nat called the all or nothing thinking, and that's when we think about things in terms of them either being really good or really bad, and there isn't really room for any middle ground. So an example of a nat, an all or nothing nat could be everyone at the party hates me. Another type of nat is overestimating danger. An example of that is if I have to say something, I'm going to go red and everyone's going to laugh at me. And another example is catastrophizing, and that's when our anxious minds often jump to the worst possible case scenario in a situation. So for example, I'm not going to be able to speak at all. So what I'd suggest is to try and catch if you recognize any of these types of thoughts. As we say, they're really common with both anxiety and low mood, but they can be caught and challenged and reframed. And that's what we want to do really. So first of all, recognize when you're having them, maybe link them and, name the nat that your thought or worry is related to, and then try and question them and reframe them slightly, because anxiety has a really unhelpful impact of making us feel like our worries are facts and they're things that are definitely going to come true, whereas in fact they are opinions or predictions, not facts. And so what we want to do is to learn to kind of question our worries and question how likely and how definitely they are to happen. So a way to reframe the all or nothing nat is maybe to think, okay, I don't get on with some people, but there are other people that are going to be there that are okay and that I like. An alternative to the overestimating danger nat could be, I might not go red, but even if I do, it's likely to feel more noticeable to me than to other people. And an alternative, that catastrophizing nat, is, I don't know, I can't know that that's definitely going to happen, it might not. And actually last week in maths, I spoke when I didn't think I was going to be able to. So maybe that'll happen again this time. Then we've got 3 more examples of nats. So we've got the mind reading nat, and that is when our anxious minds make us feel like we can read other people's minds, so we know what other people are thinking about us. And more often than not, we predict that they're thinking something negative about us. So an example could be, everyone hates it, I can tell by their faces. Whereas in fact, a more alternative, balanced way of thinking about that situation or responding to that worry could be, well, actually, I can't read minds, so they might not be thinking that at all. Another example is negative filter, and that's when we tend to focus more on the negative things that have happened and maybe ignore or overlook any positives. So that could be if you're talking to people at lunchtime and maybe you say one thing to your friends that you don't think lands very well, and then you think that everything you said in that conversation was wrong, when actually there may have been one thing that didn't land well, but there could have been lots of other things that did go well and things that friends responded positively to. And the last example then is what we call mission impossible, and that's when we can set ourselves quite high standards and high goals and expectations, which can put pressure on us often because they're kind of, it's not realistic for us or for anybody to be able to do those things all the time. So an example of this nat is, I have to get it right all the time. And an alternative and perhaps more helpful way of thinking about that or responding to that worry could be, well, no one can get things right all of the time. That's just not possible. All I can do is my best in this situation. So perhaps have a go at trying to identify and reframe your own nats, and then see how that might impact on how you feel in situations and what you feel able to do. Now we want to move on to a strategy to manage how you behave around your anxiety. So we're going to be looking at how you can approach the thing that you are afraid of in a gradual, manageable, step-by-step way. So linking back to that graph on the previous slide about us gradually going back into those situations. And the idea is that you begin to gain confidence in doing things that you feel more comfortable with, and then to gradually increase confidence in trying things that you feel more anxious about. And in order to think about steps for that plan, it can be helpful to map them onto a rating scale, like an anxiety rating scale, so you can see where these things may sit. So, for example, you might rate asking a question in English as a 7 out of 10. So if 10 is the most terrified ever, 0 is not at all anxious, super chilled, 5 is about halfway. Asking a question in English might be a 7 out of 10, so something that scores quite high. Standing up and giving a presentation in class may be a 10 out of 10, so the most anxiety provoking. But answering a question in maths, where you perhaps feel a bit more confident in that subject, you might rate as a 4 out of 10. And by thinking through these kind of anxious situations and rating them on this scale, you can begin to work out the order that you might be able to tackle these steps in, beginning with the tasks that score the lowest, that feel the less anxiety provoking or the less scary, and then gradually working your way up to the higher ones. So this is an example of someone's what we call step-by-step plan. So we're going to read it out to you. So we've got a young person called Joe who feels really anxious in social situations as he worries that people aren't going to like him and are going to judge him. And as a result of this, he avoids social situations as much as possible. But he'd really like to be able to go to his friend's birthday party in a couple of months' time. But at the moment, this feels too anxiety provoking because he thinks that people aren't going to like him there and no one's going to talk to him. So Joe and his wellbeing practitioner make a list of all the situations that Joe avoids, or situations where Joe has had to use some unhelpful habits or safety behaviours in order to cope because of this anxiety. What they would then do once they've made that list is rate how anxious Joe would feel trying each of those situations, and maybe break things down into smaller steps where needed, using this step-by-step plan, as you can see in the table on the right-hand side. So the idea with using a step plan is to start at the lower rung and repeat the step as many times as needed until it feels comfortable and until it feels like you've overcome that level of anxiety. And this is that people can really feel that they are confident in the step and that they're able to overcome that level of anxiety before moving on to the next one. So in this example, the activity that scored the lowest for Joe is to say one thing in a group activity in class. So that might be the first step that Joe has a go at doing. If a step feels too big or it feels too difficult, by all means do break it down further and add another step in between. If things are feeling too daunting, then you might find that you just don't want to try a step at all. So it's really important to work on gradually extending your comfort zone. So once Joe has practiced saying things in group activities in class to the point where he no longer finds that too anxiety provoking, he then might move on to his next step, which would be joining friends for lunch in the canteen and asking them a question. Another important part of the step plan is to acknowledge, I suppose, the effort and the hard work that you're putting in by working through these steps, by pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, and so to praise yourself for each step you do. Rewards don't have to be a financial thing, but they could be things like allowing more time to do your favourite activity at home. Maybe it's an extra hour on the PlayStation or a bit of a pamper session. Might help to think this through with somebody at home, a parent or trusted adult, and perhaps get them to help you think about what rewards you could put in place for each step on this plan. It's important that the steps, like I say, acknowledge the great effort and hard work that you're putting in, and also rewards can really help motivate you to keep going and to keep trying these difficult things. So I think this cartoon shows what a good step-by-step plan can be. So repeating each step until it feels comfortable before moving on to the next one. Break steps down into smaller steps if needed, and having praise and rewards for each step. Really important that first step is achievable. We're not trying to set ourselves up to fail, so we suggest that the first step that someone has on their plan doesn't score more than maybe a 3 on that anxiety scale, and is maybe something that you are able to do sometimes or have done in the past. And it might also be that you need to do a bit of problem solving around what's making a step difficult to reach. So maybe, like I said before, maybe you actually need a middle step in between, or maybe you need to actually go back and do the previous step a few times first to boost your confidence. Or maybe it's a case of thinking, well, does anything about that situation of the step need to change? Ooh, sorry about that. So what it might help to do is to come up with a specific goal that you're working towards on this step-by-step plan. So we said that might be something that you find like a big fear that you find anxiety provoking. That might be something that you're avoiding. It might be something that you'd like to be able to do but don't currently feel able to right now. So for Joe earlier, his goal was to go to his friend's party. For Marion, quite a few slides ago, their goal was to be able to ask questions and speak to people at the college open day. So have a think about what your goal might be. It might be that you want to feel less anxious socially. And I think that's, if that's helpful, that could be a really great goal to work towards. But what it might help to do is to think about making that goal a little bit more specific and a little bit, as we call it, SMART, which is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time limited. So a way to make that goal a bit more specific might be to pick a specific social situation that you'd like to be able to overcome, you'd like to be able to do. So maybe being able to ask questions in class, or maybe it's being able to talk to new people in social situations. Measurable is thinking about what's going to be different when you're working towards that goal. How are you going to know that you're making progress? What's changing? Achievable is just that, is this goal possible to achieve? While it's likely that the goal is going to be outside our comfort zone, it's important that it's not too difficult to achieve, so it's something within our reach. Realistic is just, is this goal actually practical to do? And time limited is thinking about what kind of time frame you like to be able to work to reach this goal in, and also feels realistic to reach it in. So by thinking about your goal using this acronym, and by maybe thinking about rewording it slightly, hopefully that will help. Hopefully you'll end up with a goal that's really concrete and really specific, so that will help you to think exactly what steps you need to get there, and help you to think exactly about how you know you're making progress towards the goal. So now we wanted to spend some time thinking about how the COVID pandemic may have impacted on people's social anxiety. So the pandemic will have had an effect on different people in different ways, and likely on everyone in one way or another. But we know that for young people like yourselves, having such a great disruption to your lives, such as disruptions to education and socialising, is likely to cause some real challenges for some people. For some people, the enforced time apart from friends and loved ones might have been really difficult and really frustrating. For others who perhaps already felt anxious in social interactions, having to distance and isolate and study from home may have felt much more comfortable than life before. And so now that we've moved out of lockdowns and restrictions, a return to a more normal way of life with more interactions may actually feel really overwhelming or scary for those people. The rules and restrictions brought in over the past few years, and the change in how we communicate, so for example communicating more over technology like Zoom or Teams, has led for many to social situations feeling much more unusual and perhaps more associated with threats or dangers, so more likely to activate that FFF response. I think one of the reasons why returning to school full-time and in person might have felt so tricky for some over the past couple of years is because it was a relatively sudden change in routine, rather than this gradual step-by-step approach that we've been talking about. But again, some of you might have actually unconsciously been using the step-by-step approach already. such as feeling comfortable taking the bus to school again or buying things in shops again. If you think back, you might actually realise that there were situations you felt very anxious about before that now feel okay or natural to go into. And by returning to everyday routines, you've already been doing a version of your own step plan. By repeatedly doing something that maybe used to make you feel anxious or uncomfortable until that anxiety has reduced. So if we think back to that initial equation, that through kind of leaving lockdown and getting back into everyday normal routines and taking part in things again, you may have reduced how frightening you thought something was, and also realise that you can cope better with things than you might have predicted. So while you may still feel anxious in social situations, which is likely why you're listening into this talk, I wonder if there might be things which feel more comfortable to do now than they did a few months or a year ago. And thinking about those situations and reminding yourself of them when you try to overcome other anxious situations could really help to give you that confidence boost in feeling more able to cope. So I want to share with you now some relaxation exercises that can be really useful to support you in stressful or anxiety-provoking situations, and when you notice that your anxiety might be starting to increase. So these can help you to stay in situations for longer, so that might help when you're doing some of the steps on that step-by-step plan, and can also help to give you that confidence boost that you're able to cope. So the first activity is calm breathing, and there are lots of different ways to practice calm breathing, and they all generally involve taking slow, deep and gentle breaths in and out. On the left-hand side of the screen there is a more sensory version that involves tracing around your hand. So breathing slowly in as you move up each finger, pausing, kind of holding your breath briefly at the top of each finger, and then breathing slowly out as you move down each finger. And the idea behind this is to slow down your heart rate and breathing to a steady, calm and gentle pace. Really focusing on each breath can also help to calm a worried or overwhelmed mind. And by slowing your breathing down, you can help to bring your body back to a more relaxed place, which can help to counter any physical effects of the FFF anxiety response. The second activity is called grounding, and this is all about using your senses to refocus your attention on the things around you. Again, there are lots of different ways of doing this. They all generally involve using one or more of your senses, and they can help to take your mind away from worries or unpleasant physical symptoms that you might get if you're feeling stressed or anxious. This can also be a useful activity to do maybe before bed, before going to sleep, as a way of winding down. So the example of grounding we've got on the right-hand side of the screen here is called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 activity. And that involves looking around you and identifying 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. And again, really focusing on all the details of those things that you're noticing. Other ways of practicing grounding could be to look around you in the room and identify objects that are certain colours or that are certain shapes. Or maybe going through the alphabet and looking for things in the room that start with each letter. Or maybe thinking of certain categories going through the alphabet, like thinking of names of football teams or favourite bands or TV shows that start with each letter. So if you do need more support with how you're feeling, we'd really encourage you to reach out to somebody, whether that's a trusted adult in your family or in your community, or one of the people or organisations on the slide here. That could be your GP, so that's your doctor, a wellbeing or a pastoral team at your school or college or university. Or there are lots of organisations on this screen here which can also provide information, advice and support. I'm not going to talk through them all individually, but you can always pause the video here to read the little summary of each of them, and it's always worth having a look on their websites as well. So lastly, just to remind you, you can always reach out to us at Centre 33 for support. We support young people aged 13 to 25 with practical issues and emotional needs. So whether it's a one-off chat about something as and when you need it, or if it's more ongoing support you'd like, then we can help with a range of things, including mental health, housing and homelessness, employment, money and finances, sexual health, and young carers support. So our services are free and you can get in touch with us yourself. So you can contact us Monday to Friday, 12 to 5, and Saturdays, 10 to 1. We've got a phone number, we've got a text and WhatsApp number, got an email address, and we also have what we call drop-ins at our hubs around the county. So we've got a hub in Ely, Cambridge, Wisbech, Peterborough and Huntingdon. If you visit our website, centre33.org.uk, you can find out the locations of all these hubs and our opening times for drop-ins. And basically what a drop-in is that you can come along on a certain day and certain time to one of our hubs and talk to one of our frontline staff. You don't need an appointment, you don't need to let us know that you're coming in advance, you can just rock up and have a chat with somebody. We also have on the left-hand side of the screen there our socials. So that's a great way of keeping in touch with us, finding out about any updates to our offer and seeing some of the work that we're doing. If you did want to watch any more of the wellbeing videos or access any of our self-help resources, you can check out our website and our YouTube channel. So our YouTube channel has recordings of some of these longer talks on, and our website has some of the shorter self-help videos and resources like posters and guides and things like that. So that's the end of this talk. Thank you very much for listening, and we really hope that you find some of the things that we've talked about today helpful.